Good morning, fish keepers. We've done it. We've made it to Friday. Let's do coffee. How good. Oh, it's really hot, but it's really good. Cool. All right. So, before we get too far into anything, I just want to say a thank you for being here with us. It's much appreciated, and I really hope that you enjoy this stream. That is about all I want to say. Let's bring up our guest. Push some buttons. Good morning, Rob. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Sorry. Good evening. Good evening. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, but yeah.
Afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, international time maths is always a bit of a wiggle around with everybody, but yeah, thank you very much for joining us. It's much appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. So.
Cool. Can you please introduce yourself a little bit? Let people know who you are and how you got into keeping fish.
Sure. So, Rob McLure from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the U.S. I started. We got a family, living room fish tank when I was probably about 7 or 8. It was the 70s, and it seemed at that point in time it was a pretty popular thing to do. I think several of our neighbors had fish tanks, even some had multiple fish tanks. So it was kind of going around. And I also was into fishing, catching fish. And my grandparents had a house on the lake, and I would go stay there with them every summer for at least a week or two. And I would always catch fish and keep them in kind of like a big live well, so a screened in place that we would have in the lake. And I'd feed them all week, and then was sad when I had to let them go, before before I went home for the week. And my grandma, kind of pushed on my parents and said, you need to get that kid his own fish tank. And they said, well, we already got one. So she finally acted on her own, and there was a gentleman at her work that bred guppies, and she talked to him, and he set me up with a used tank and a bunch of I think today we'd call them feeder guppies. They're just kind of a mutt mixture of guppies. And but yeah, I had that tank in my room and got them to breed. Got to experience live babies even it was probably about 9 or 10 years old. And kept that tank for a few years. It wasn't the best situation. We did not have air conditioning, and it was a second floor of a house. So in the summer it got pretty warm. So, but so I lost a few. But unfortunately, it was a used tank, and eventually, I think probably when I was about 12, it cracked or got a leak. And after much cursing and drywall work, my dad said, we're done with fish tanks. So so I didn't have them again until my sophomore year of college. So my freshman year, I lived in the dormitories for my university, and had kind of a wild roommate, let's say. Wasn't the best always. So I decided the next year to get an apartment with a couple of guys who were, for lack of better words, they were kind of nerds, and I said, so I would control the level of the party then, and I moved in with them that next fall, and they both already had fish tanks set up, and honestly, we had probably about 6 or 7 tanks in our apartment. We had cichlids, saltwater, you name it, and haven't looked back. I've pretty much always had a tank since then.
Nice.
I disappeared. Okay, so after that, I worked for a time at a fish shop, but it was pretty limited, very simple stock and whatnot. They did have some saltwater, so I was getting more into the saltwater aspect at that time, just because they had more options at that shop than they did for freshwater. And then kind of went back and started with some cichlids again. And my son, who's now 23, he kind of got into it with me, so we joined the Aquarium Society in 2011, and that was when things exploded. My son became disinterested. I think the presentations and stuff were too much for him as a little guy. But for me, it was like, it blew my mind. I had looked at things like tetras and rainbows and cories as stuff that in my mind you had to have a pond in Florida to be able to breed these. So once I started hearing about all these different folks that were breeding all these different fish, it just I went crazy. So within, I would say, the next 3 years after that, I propagated over 70 aquarium plants, and I bred probably already by that time I bred probably about 100 species of tropical fish. So
Oh.
and I decided that I needed to specialize a little bit. So I really liked cories. So I started specializing in cories in about 20, like end of 2012, beginning of 2013. And since then, I've bred 75 different kinds of cories. That number has kind of went up and down a little bit because, especially in recent years, become friends with Dr. Luis Tencat, who is ichthyologist out of Brazil, and he did his doctoral on aspidoras. And with he and I looking into what's in the hobby and comparing it to what he was finding, not only did the number of scientifically described aspidoras shrink, but the number of aspidoras in the hobby also significantly shrunk as we figured out what things were. So, at one point in time, I would have said I bred, aspidoras CW52 and C118 and C125, but now we all know we know that those are all just a slightly different variant of a certain species. So I kind of have knocked those off of my list for now. So, but but that's how it goes. So more recently, been been spreading out again. I still have a bunch of cories, still breeding cories right now, but also have gotten some interest in egg scatterers and gouramis, and particularly the pseudomutuals or blue-eyed rainbows. So I'm sure there'll be more to come, but I've always kind of had a general interest in that. So in all kinds of fish. So.
So I've got a question, but I want to go with a slightly different one first. Is spawning and reproducing fish your main interest when it comes to fish keeping, or is it the general fish keeping aspect of it, if that makes sense?
So I will say that I think there's two main drives for me. One is the spawning and reproducing of fish. I will say that especially seeing kind of figuring out something that maybe somebody hasn't done or I haven't done. So that's interesting to me, and just constantly learning about them. But I also think for me, a big part of it is the social aspect. So, kind of right when I got into Corydoras, Eric Bodrek, he's an amazing, fish breeder here in the United States, and has been in the hobby for a long time. I believe Eric has spawned more than 500 different species of aquarium fish. So, so he is amazing, and he's modest too. So, but yeah, he's really good, and he kind of took me under his wing for the Corydoras part of his hobby, and he said, why don't you come to this catfish convention? I think it was 2014, and he said you could stay at my house beforehand. I'll show you my fish room and all that. And he as I was driving there, he says, I've got a surprise for you. You're going to be hanging out with Ian Fuller. And I'm like, oh, whoa, it's like, so Eric, introduced me to Ian and Hans, and really, that was huge for me, just getting to meet those icons. And, it kind of opened a lot of doors. In addition to that, it started me more so on, coming up with my own talks and trying to develop that side of the hobby. And so I came up with my own presentations, and since these 60 or 70 times I've given presentations, I've got about 3 or 4 different ones, but most aquarium societies want to hear just the basic intro to breeding cories one. But I've spoken in the UK twice. They've gotten me out to Canada, and then of course all over the US. And then during COVID, gave presentations for pretty much anywhere and everywhere. So there was some pretty interesting ones. I gave a talk to some folks in Peru once, so that was kind of fun. So yeah, so virtually, but yeah, so.
So what was it about corridors that drew your interest? And for the people that are watching, most will probably know you for
Sure.
that. So what
Yeah,
was it
definitely.
about a group of fish that was for you?
Yeah. So part of it was that it was just entertaining to me as they hatched. They're kind of free swimming right away, right? They're like cichlids and plecos, different things. Like you have this period of time where they're kind of not necessarily dormant or whatever, but wiggler stage or whatnot. I've in my work with them, I mean, I've seen some like CW80 from Peru, which is now what they call a true Corydoradinae. It's a long snout one, and I actually watched those hatch under a weak USB microscope, and it was amazing to me that they literally would spring out of the egg and zoom, just boom 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 boom, like right, they went crazy. And I'm like, that was really interesting, just the behavior in regards to the breeding and the fry part. And then the other big piece of it was I was getting a lot of pressure. Milwaukee Aquarium Society historically was known for its cichlid breeders, and I was getting a lot of pressure from other aquarists in my aquarium society. You should do cichlids. If you're going to be a big breeder, you should do cichlids. And I started down that road in probably 2012 or maybe 2011, 2012, and quickly realized I just don't have enough space. If I was going to breed cichlids, I could maybe maintain 5 or 6 different types. That would be about it. And with Corys, the fact that you can breed them in pretty small aquariums for the most part, I think a ton of my success has been in 5 or 10 gallon aquariums, so
Wow.
so you can keep them and breed them in smaller aquariums, and as long as you're doing your water changes and watching chemistry and whatnot, they do very well. And in fact, one of the things I've learned in that since that time is I actually kind of redid my fish room and went with bigger fish tanks, which I think actually has slowed down my breeding. So, so I think that putting them in closer quarters. So if you have a group of 6 Corys in closer quarters, they are forced to interact with each other a little bit more, and I think that can lead to more breeding. Again, you do have to really watch your water changes. A small tank can go south real quick. So you got to make sure that you're watching things and taking care of things. So bigger tanks are a little more forgiving. I remember playing with a 40-gallon breeder tank compared to a 10-gallon tank, and just watching. I use pretty low TDS water. It's about 125 parts per million. So in 1 week, a 10-gallon tank, when I first fill it, the pH of that is about 7.1 or 7.2. In 1 week's time, that'll start dropping, and I'll get it down to maybe 6 something, just because the TDS is low. And in 2 weeks, it could be as low as 5, 5.5 or so. So it's just that the fish waste really can have an effect on a lot of the factors in a smaller aquarium. That 40 breeder, now I remember measuring that and not doing water changes for 1 month, and it was still above 7 with the same exact beginning water. So, and it didn't have a heavy fish load, but still interesting that just a larger amount of water was much more stable. So, but
It's interesting.
yeah, but that was a big part of it, was that I knew I needed something. If I was going to specialize in something, I knew I needed something smaller, or that could be done in smaller tanks, because I just don't have the space to to spread it. So yeah.
When you say cichlids, are you talking African cichlids or flakes, or are you talking about Americans or dwarfs, or because obviously cichlids are quite a big
Yes.
world.
So the Milwaukee Aquarium Society had they had Ted Judy, who specialized in West African cichlids, and Jeff
Mhm.
Michaels, who specialized in dwarf South Americans, really. So your apistos and whatnot. And I think in the past they had people who specialized in Mbuna and other things like that. And they lost some of those members. So I think the hope for me was that I was going to be
Pick something up there.
yep, go back to the bigger ones, which wasn't going to work for me. So yeah, so not with the limited space that I have. So
I also find it really interesting that you think that a smaller aquarium works better for spawning, because over the last few weeks I've been going, man, I think my tanks need to be bigger to get my chorus to spawn. I'm not giving them enough room to stretch. I'm
yeah,
running on like a 2 foot, 50
yep,
liter, 60 liter, which what's that,
yep. That's
about
and
20
that's
odd gallons.
yeah, those are the bigger tanks that I'm talking about that I've switched to now. Is I've
Yeah,
switched to ones that are just about that size, thinking that it would be, uh, just better for the Corys, healthier, right? And it's
yeah,
I
yeah.
I will say that I've noticed that just in general the spawning has decreased, compared to, with its number of species spawning and number of times spawning. I had a pair of Barbatus that was pretty monstrous, like pretty close to 100 millimeters. They were, and both male and female, they were just really big. But I had those two in a 10-gallon tank, which is not sure how many liters that is, but it's probably about half of what you're looking at there. That those
Mm.
tanks, and they would spawn twice a week and produce 150 to 250 eggs, I would say,
Oh,
every day for 6 months, at least 6 or 7 months. So they were just nonstop, and taught me something really interesting about Barbados, which is that they I don't know if you've ever talked to betta breeders or whatnot, that they have the fry themselves release sort of like a growth inhibiting hormone, right? So like if you keep a bunch of betta fry together, you're going to find that some grow faster and some don't. And the
mm-hmm.
idea behind that is that some of the fry are kicking off this growth inhibiting hormone. I found out that Barbatus and Scleromistax macropterus both have something that is it's almost worse than that. So you'll notice with Barbatus and Scleromistax macropterus, if you try to raise them in large numbers in smaller confines, right? At a smaller tank, which honestly, with raising fry, you kind of want to do that because you want to make sure that you're able to provide food enough that's going to hit them in the face. If I put 200 tiny Barbatus in a huge tank, I mean, yes, I could produce enough baby brine shrimp to fill that tank, but then you're going to have water quality issues too, so it's kind of a lose-lose situation. So usually with Cory fry, you want to start them off in a smaller tank. But what I found out with Barbatus and Macropterus is they must have a seriously nasty, growth inhibiting hormone that they kick off, because not only do they stunt the growth of the other ones, but it seems to kind of melt their fins. So
Wow.
if you look at them under a magnifying glass or whatnot, they have like it's just, it looks like fin rot, but and there's nothing else. There's no other reason or explanation for it. It's like, because some of the fry are perfectly fine, yet other ones are stunted, and they have, their fins are all worn off. So um
Wow.
and I've been kind of able to counteract it sometimes. The best I ever did, like I told you, you're talking, I'd get 150 to 200 eggs. Best I ever did was about 50 that I raised up, like from a batch. But that was just, constantly kind of keep moving from bigger to bigger tank as soon as I thought that it was possible. Eventually I got them into like I think it was like almost a 30-gallon tank, and I was able to raise up about 55 of them. But yeah, it's tricky. The only other option would be is to have a whole bunch of smaller tanks and just start splitting them up, and then you could get good numbers, so
Yeah, wow.
yeah.
Cool. Very much like you would with betas, I assume, pulling them apart to stop all that stuff happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah.
We've had a question from the floor.
Okay.
Stephen would like to know, do you have any secret to CW111 spawning? And if you do, will you divulge it, please?
So my CW111 are actually spawning weekly right now. So they are I would say they're seasonal. So they're a very interesting fish. There's a lot of doubt when they first came into the hobby, because the male's dorsal will spike up, and I'm not talking about the spine, like, but the fin itself. Yeah, so the spine stays the same size, but the dorsal fin itself will spike up to, I mean, I would say 2 times to 2.5 times its original height. And when that
Wow.
when that male's dorsal spikes up like that, it's breeding time. So actually right now, and I've talked to other hobbyists, Roland van Oenkirk in Netherlands, and I think somebody else, we all agreed that like right now seems to be the start. This is the start of their spawning season. And I noticed that the males, and I have a group. I originally had a group of wild caught, and they just were never right. So they gave me a few spawns, but I think from the handling of them, or something, from the place I got them, they always seemed kind of off a little bit, and I eventually kind of lost them all one by one. But I was able to get a decent amount of F1s going. So I parted with some groups, and I grew a group of about, I think I had 12 originally. I'm down to 11 of F1s out, and now they're breeding. But you could tell, probably about, you know, I would say April, May, you could see the male's dorsal start to grow. And what's interesting is that now we'll go through this breeding period, and it will shrink back down. And that's the crazy part, because a lot of people said, no way, no way, that's not possible, right? Once they develop that long extended dorsal, it's going to stay that way. And it's not fin rot, it's like a natural process. So I've seen it
Mhm.
happen myself, and it's bizarre, so that it'll shrink back down to like a standard Cory sized dorsal fin, and then it'll pop back up when it's breeding season again. So
Amazing.
it's really crazy. It's pretty interesting. So one thing is obviously watch the time of year. I think that they're much more likely to spawn going into the fall. And I've had them spawn, I mean, honestly, as late as January. So they kind of keep going. I've seen, I will say I've seen and heard of people spawning them in March or whatnot, but that could be just, they're doing something else to trigger them or whatnot. But for me, I've always seen them, late summer through maybe December. That's, December, January is a good time to try to breed them. I'm keeping them in, I will say I'm keeping them in relatively low TDS water. I have them about 125 parts per million TDS, but with my wild caught ones, I kept them even lower than that. It was probably about 90 TDS. So, and I also it's clear water. I'm not really adding any tannins or anything like that. Feed them good, feed them live foods. I'm feeding mine baby brine shrimp, occasional live black worms, quality, pellets and quality flakes right here and there. I do throw in, microworms, and the adults go after that still too. So any kind of live foods is really good for them. And then just do keep your water quality up, do your water changes. I do 50% weekly on that tank. I will say they like to lay eggs on, um, like, not, I wouldn't say like fine leaf plants like Java moss. They like a little broader leaf. I was talking to Ian, his were spawning on crypt leaves, and mine,
Mhm.
which is crazy, spawn on Valsinaria leaves. And it's pretty funny to watch, because it's like they will make a line of eggs along this, thing of Val. It's the only
Yeah.
Cory I've ever seen do that. No other Cory uses Valsinaria to spawn on. So yeah, so it's pretty neat to watch that. And then um, what else can I tell you? Other than that, I think it's they don't seem that difficult to get eggs from. It's more so time of year and good care for getting eggs. My problem with them has been fry survival. So my two best batches that I had were when I got a batch of eggs. They all hatched out, and I keep them in these plastic containers, like a specimen container for the first week or so, just to make sure they're eating, make sure that once I get them on baby brine shrimp with Cory's, normally I'm home free. Well, with these ones, that plastic container, life. I have no losses. Usually everything's fine, but it's as soon as I move them to a tank, and it's not all at once, but it's like I usually put sand substrate in the tanks because I learned early on in my Cory breeding, if you're breeding Corys and you raise the fry on bare bottom or bare glass substrates, their lower fins can erode, just simply because of the bacteria buildup on the bare glass. So one of my first ones that I bred was Corydoradinae. I bred them and submitted them to my aquarium society, and other people said, "Oh, I want to buy some. I want to buy some." And I had several people coming back to me yelling at me saying, "I can't breed these fish." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" They have no lower fins. The females have no basket to hold the egg. And I looked, and yeah, sure enough, they were right. So
Oh.
and that's from, if you're desperate to grow them out on a bare substrate or a bare glass substrate, just you're gonna have to scrub the glass like all the time. Don't let any bacteria build up on there, because I think it just eats away, especially with the young fish. It eats away at their fins because they're always sitting on the bottom. So since that time, I've used sand for my Corys pretty much from the time they're 9 or 10 days old. I get them on top. So since
Wow.
but with these CW111s, just really odd. The best results I've had is actually setting up like either brand new, meaning completely cleaned, but brand new sand, brand new tank, brand new sponge filter, and then move the babies from the specimen container into that, and then I usually have good results. One would think a more established small tank would be a better idea, right?
Yeah.
And my last batch of them that I tried moving into, I had a 5-gallon tank that I raised, I think it was 65 Aspidorus albata in, right? And I cleaned the sponge filter, did several water changes on it. The sand had stuff in it, I'm sure, but you would think that would be kind of healthy, an established filter, all that stuff. And I put my last batch of CW111s in that tank, and it wasn't right away. So it's not something like, oh, there was an ammonia spike or this happened, but over time, they all passed away. So my latest attempt, I'm keeping them in a floating net breeder instead. So as opposed to, so I put that floating net breeder in the parent's tank. And again, I'm actually going through every day and using a turkey baster to clean the bottom of the net breeder so it doesn't get funky, but so far so good. I haven't had the losses. So I've actually got, I think, 7 in the net breeder, and then I have about 25 or so in the plastic container still. So I'll continue this experiment, and we'll see what happens. But so far the net breeder is looking like a good solution that doesn't make me set up a brand new tank every time I spawn them. So we'll see. Yeah.
So there's been a couple of questions that have come up. First thing I'd like to ask, however, is when you say quality flakes or pellets, what are you referring to in that? Not so much the breakdown of the food, but sort of what dry foods are you using?
Yeah. So I'm using Ebo Insect, which is like a soft 1 millimeter granule. Got to meet the guys that formed that company at the Catfish Study Group, and they're really great guys. They introduced me to their food, gave me some samples, and tried it, and I the fish loved it. I loved it, so I kept using that. What else am I using? So I use New Life Spectrum community flakes, so that they seem to make a pretty good flake. And with Corys, obviously it's not the best because it sits on the top of the water. So if I'm purposefully trying to get Corys to eat it, I'll crunch it up in my fingers a little bit, put my hand in the tank, and I've seen some people use like ketchup squirters or something like that. They could put the crushed flakes in there, shake it all up, and squirt it in the tank, just so you're getting flakes to the bottom of the tank. They will eventually fall to the bottom of the tank, but yeah, I mean, flakes aren't the best for Corys necessarily. I use freeze-dried tubifex worms, so those cubed, freeze-dried tubifex worms. Some black worm pellets. I think it's made by Aquatic Foods Inc., and I got those off of Amazon. So it's just a sinking black worm pellet. What else do I use? Sarah. Use some Sarah. Immune Pro, it's called. So it's Sarah Immune Pro. And then occasionally I use PE mysis freshwater pellets. So they're like a crumble. And then sometimes I've tried the other, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like another insect one. But I remember I fed some once and I had some odd losses, so I've kind of shied away from that one. It's out of Canada. I don't remember the name of the exact food, but it wasn't. It just kind of scared me a little bit. I was like, I fed that, and then the next day they seemed like they were having gut problems. So I was like, yeah. Um, as far as insect stuff now, I pretty much use the Ebo. So yeah.
Cool. Cool. Rebecca has said, talking about the extended dorsals. Is that extended dorsal seasonal? And other, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that word. Like I'm not pronouncing that one or yeah. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah. So I am not you're terribly familiar with the odontodes and hypostomy. So I've bred some plecos, and I wouldn't consider myself an expert to know enough, what grows and fades away on plecos. So the plecos that I've bred, as far as odontodes go, I mean, I definitely have seen the males, but I wasn't aware that they would fade away if they were out of season. So I would guess it's a similar type of reaction, but I can't speak scientifically to that in any way, just with my observations. So yeah,
Cool.
I would say it's probably akin to breeding coloration more so, so just as we all know, certain fish can get into like a breeding coloration, and that can be affected by seasons as well as conditions and everything else. So I would say it's probably similar to that. So
cool. Is there any general misconceptions about the corridors that you feel you'd like to bust for the people that are sort of watching?
Yeah, no problem. So one big thing that I was always told, as a younger fish keeper by people in shops, is that they're a cleanup crew and that they'll eat, if the other fish poop, they'll eat that, whatnot. And I think that's the biggest misconception, is that in nature they are micro predators. So they don't eat algae. Some people try to feed them algae pellets. They're not algae grazers. They actually are going after either terrestrial insects and larvae that fall into the water, or other small crustaceans, worms, and nematodes that live in the water. So the microworms thing is kind of interesting because that's a nematode, and some of the gut studies have shown that there's a good quantity of nematode in their in their guts or whatever, so they tend to eat that. So that's kind of interesting. But they found, just through talking with some scientists, they found tiny spiders, ants, parts of bugs, larvae of bugs. And then even the one thing that shows, that they need to be kept on sand, they find a good amount of sand in their guts. So obviously they're not digesting that, but they are intaking it, obviously. So so that's a big misconception, I would say, is that they're a cleanup crew. I would not advise Corys as a cleanup crew, and I would say they need to be kept as any other type of fish with their own nutritional needs. So that's probably the biggest one. And I think one of my first unfortunate ones with a fish store like that was when I was in college. I had some Oscars, and the gentleman at the fish store said I should get some Corys as a cleanup crew with my Oscars. That didn't end well, as you can imagine. So for either of them, yeah. So yeah.
Do you think part of that cleanup crew mentality or mindset is because they appear to be scavenging around, breaking through the sand and all that kind of stuff, and that's why they're sort of considered a cleaner upper fish?
Yeah, not only that, but I would think that, just watching their reaction, if you put freeze-dried tube effects, or you put black worms in a tank, right? Like watching their reaction going after something that's moving and tube like, like that. It's you can see how someone who doesn't pay attention to them that often would watch them. Like, let's say you had a cichlid or a gourami make a long tube shaped poop, right? You could see the Corys saying,
Yes.
that's a worm, I'm going to go after that. Then quickly realizing it's not food, spit it out, but the shopkeeper or person who's working at a pet store, you could see them saying, oh yeah, not only do they like poop, they go after it, but they're going after it because it's an optical illusion to them, so they think it's a worm. So yeah, but it's not going to be healthy for them, and I don't think that they'll actually. I think I've watched Corey spit out things that they don't like, so they could do that. So
I've heard I've heard fish keepers tell me as well that Corys can be used as cleanup crew because they eat and they survive off the leftover food from the bigger fish above them.
Yeah,
and I think that's a shame because obviously they're their own species with their own dietary conditions. So to feed them purely on leftovers is a big mistake.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting other thing is that you often see in shops and whatnot that the Corys look okay, even though they may be starving. And what's interesting is that they have that structure on the outside of their body. Their armor is their scutes or the plates that go along the outside of their body. So it can be really hard to tell if a Cory is starving. So you almost have to like look at flip them and look at their belly, and you'll find a lot of times that if a Cory's been in a shop for a long time, or if it's been in transit from getting to the wild to wherever you're getting it from, if you flip them, their bellies are quite hollow. Another crazy thing is that a lot of the true Corydoras or the long snout ones, they've done some studies that show that 90 some percent that they took a look at, I think it was Corydoras amapensis, have an internal worm parasite, basically, and they live with that, they breed with that, they're okay. But in nature, there's enough food that I think it doesn't really matter, right? The Cory can handle living with the parasite, and it has enough food to provide for itself and the parasite, unfortunately, So it's a nasty one, but it's a symbiotic relationship, right? But the problem is that when you start bringing them into the hobby, then they don't do so well because they don't have that constant ability to pick at food. There's not, oh, here's a nematode here, here's a insect larvae over there, here's a real worm that's not a parasite over here, right? So they don't have that constant flow of food, and as a result, the parasites in our tanks take a nasty toll on them. So that's one thing I recommend for anybody who's especially if they're wild caught, is to look at trying to deworm the true Corydoras, so the long snout ones specifically. So I kind of do that, naturally, if I get new long snout ones. And what I like to use is, you can get it on Amazon as discus wormer, but it's called flubendazole, and it doesn't it doesn't have to be eaten to be absorbed, and it doesn't harm plants or fish or your biological cycle, so it's only going to harm parasitic worms, and if you've got any hydra, it'll take care of those too. So so
that's one of the medications that we do have access to, which is quite nice in the country because we're pretty limited on a lot of stuff.
Yes, some places they're passing a lot of laws on what you can and can't have. So
we've had a question and I've just lost it. It was related to how do you get tubifex to sink or not float. I can't find it here.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yep, yeah, there we go. Yep. So for the freeze dried tube effects, so Eric Bodrock in his talks, he talks about a method that he uses, which is he'll take the cube and put it in the water for a few seconds, then he brings it back out of the water and squeezes it a bit, and so it kind of like crushes the gel or whatever that's holding it together, and then
Mhm.
puts it back in the water and just kind of rubs his fingers together, and it'll break up. So I have been doing that, and honestly, if you've got good flow in your tank, it's crazy. Yeah, I've got a tank right now with or I'm sorry, it was Corydoras. Now it's Brocas Harold Schultzi, but they're a slightly bigger stir-by like Cory type, and I can get that. It's a longer tank. It's 20 long, and so it's what is it? It's less than 3 feet, but it's still somewhat of a longer, shorter tank. But I've got good flow in it, and once I crumble up one in the one of the cubes in the tank, I can get the whole thing filled with the floating worms, and they just go crazy. You just watch them. They're just like, this is heaven. There's food everywhere. I'm going here,
Yeah.
here. So it's fun. Once you get some practice at doing that, so wet the tube effects cube and then pull it back out of the water, crunch it up a bunch, then hold it back in the water and just start moving your fingers back and forth, and it'll start breaking up. The other nice thing is you can take one cube and do get some of the tube effects in one tank, and then go to the next tank, start rubbing your fingers together, so that way sometimes those cubes it's too much for one tank, so you can kind of spread it around a little bit too.
Mhm.
So
What I sometimes do as well is I take a glass and scoop some tank water, just
mhm.
a little bit, and then put the cube in, or the two
Yep.
cubes, whatever, and just swirl it around in it, and
Yep.
then just pour it a little bit at a time.
Yep, that works too. I do that with frozen food sometimes too.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, I think Eric's methods are like mine, which it's all about speed. So
Mhm.
that's with so many tanks to feed or whatnot, you want to try to go as fast as you can. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mhm.
Cool. I've another question here. My albinos do the dance, but I still can't tell the genders. Are there different tails for different varieties of corridors, or are they all very similar? Can you help?
There are different ones. Some of them wear the badge that says he, him, she. No, I'm kidding. No, no, no. But the let's see, the elegans. So they're the elegans, which are now in the genus Gastrodermis. So they often have different coloration between the males and females. So they actually the pattern is somewhat different with the gastrodermis. So that's one where you can easily kind of tell males and females. With the Aeneas types, which are now Osteogaster. So that's the genus Osteogaster is the Aeneas types, which is, I think, probably what they're referring to when they say albinos. Those is usually no sexual dimorphism in color. There's no color that's going to tell you, and there's no fin differences other than the lower ventral fins. So the ventral fins on the females are going to be slightly more rounded or basket shaped, and the males are going to be slightly more pointed. But the best way for me to sex cories is to make sure that they're well fed. So if you're buying them from the store, they may not necessarily be in the best condition, right? So you want to give it a couple of weeks, make sure that they're eating. If you can get live foods in them, that's really going to help. Of any kind, really. Baby brine shrimp, some Daphnia, some black worms or tubifex worms. That's great. And then once you've got them fed up, and healthier for a couple of weeks, take them out of the tank and put them in something shallow so you can look directly down on the top. If the widest part of the fish is near the gills, it's a male. If the widest part of the fish looking down on it from the top is about the middle of the dorsal, that's a female. So that's the best way, really,
Uh,
with Aeneas and with like panda, stirby. Those ones are now considered Hoplosoma. That's the genus. So those two types, that's pretty much the best way to sex them that I've seen. Pygmaeus hastatus, the females are like 1.5 times bigger than the males, so that's pretty easy. So Barbatus, again, you're going to have color scleromistax, I should say. So barbatus specifically, though, you're going to have color and fin differences that show you. So the barbatus males are going to have longer dorsal fin. Sometimes other scleromistax have longer dorsal and pectoral fins. So that's a big difference with those. That you could tell the males from the females. Usually with barbatus, oddly enough, and some of the other scleromistax, the males can be longer or can be bigger, which is odd because with most Corydoradinae fish or most Cory types, it's the other way around, that the females are slightly longer. The hardest ones to sex are probably the Brocas. So Brocas, and I mean that in the old sense of the word, in the green guys, right, and in the new sense of the word. So the new genus Brocas that they've just recently released also contains fish like, let me think, like Leopardus. That's considered a Brocas now. Robustus, Pulcher. So just to try to give you an idea of which species would be considered a Brocas now. But those are, Sodalis, Agassizi, these are all Brocas. So these are a taller bodied Cory type. And they don't fatten up almost like in the same way that the other, the Aeneas types and then the Sturbi types, they don't fatten up in that way. Or if they do, you must have to be feeding them extreme amounts. So I have met one fish keeper who, I'll try to be kind, money is no object for him. So he is very, very, very wealthy, and he has staff that feed his Corys from a 5-gallon bucket of live blackworms.
Wow.
So you can imagine how much that costs. So for me, my price US right now for a quarter pound, which is a plastic bag about this wide and maybe that much filled, like a blackworm. So a quarter pound of blackworms is $35. So you can imagine how much a 5-gallon bucket is of blackworms. So
Yeah.
I will say his Brocas, you could sex them by looking from the top, but that's because they were, gorging themselves all the time. They were, but for the most part, what I've seen is the best way to sex the Brocas types is the lower ventral fins, so the basket fins. So in the Brocas types, the males really have a significantly pointy rounded, so that that enters into it as well. But for your albinos, I would say the best thing is feed them up, make sure that you've got 2 weeks of good food in them and maybe some live foods if you can, and then pull them out. And the females are, as long as they're fully mature, the females will be very, very slightly longer than the males, and the widest part of their body looking down from the top is going to be in the middle of the dorsal fin, whereas the males, the widest part of the body is going to be at about the gills, the back of the gills. So
Cool. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
How do you document your breeding successes and challenges?
So a lot of the documentation I've done is unfortunately on Facebook. So there's a group called Corridor Spawning Reports, and I've used that quite a bit. I also maintained for a while with a few other people, and it's kind of died off, but we had a US Corridors Keepers Facebook page, and for a while, a bunch of us were sharing our spawns and spawning information on there, as well as Corridors World Facebook page, and there's several others. So a lot of it is there. Unfortunately, it's still there, so I can still search it if I need to go look something up. But yeah, it was more of a sharing thing, and then at the same time, as I was sharing it, I realized I was also documenting it and leaving myself a reference. So yeah, so that's pretty much what I do. And then in addition to that, with my talks, if I do breed something that's challenging or special, I usually try to incorporate that into my talks. So Scleromistax macropterus, no genus change on that one. It stays the same. So Scleromistax macropterus was a particularly difficult one. And I don't think, I think at the time that I actually got decent spawns and decent hatches and repeatable spawning from that, the only person that had ever done it was, I think, in the Bolton Aquarium in the UK. They had kept them and they found a couple of fry, but they hadn't triggered them. They hadn't watched them spawn. They didn't repeat. There's no repetition of it, you know. So Macropterus was a big deal. And I document that. I have a whole talk about Scleromistax, which includes a lot on that. And then in my general Cory's talk, that's, you know, one of the I tell Cory stories basically about, you know, breeding different Corys, and I kind of detail that to a little bit, you know, so that your general aquarist can get an idea that it's, you know, it's not all just cold water changes. You know, sometimes there's a bit more, including years of trying different things, you know, before you can kind of crack them. You know, so.
Do you have a bit of a checklist? Well, this hasn't worked, so we'll try this one. This hasn't worked, we'll try this.
Yeah,
and sort of go down a list, or
yeah. But so there's a problem with that. So I was able to get real, meaning not raised in a pond or in Florida or in someone's tank, but I got wild caught Aeneas, which is now. And they've changed not only the genus, but they've changed the species on that one. So it is now Osteogaster aenea. So, but it formerly was Corydoradinae. So the fish formerly known as Aeneas. It's kind of like Prince. But yeah, so that I was able to get from the island of Trinidad, which is where they were scientifically described from, which is kind of crazy because you look at, you know, people say I'm selling or I'm exporting Aeneas from Peru. I'm exporting Aeneas from Brazil, Uruguay, you know, all over the place, right? You know, and the reality is that the fish itself was scientifically described from the island of Trinidad. So most likely all of these other localities are something different, you know. So I was actually able to get some from Trinidad. And everybody knows, you know, Aeneas is a great starter, right? Yeah, it's a good one to, if you've never bred a Cory before, why don't you try Corydoradinae? I had these things for 18 months and I tried all different kinds of things, and I knew I had males and females, and I could not get them to spawn. And I was keeping a mental checklist, like you're saying, yeah, and I probably should have, yeah. Again, if I would have written it down, I don't know that it would have made that much of a difference. But finally, guess what worked? Good old cold water change. So I didn't try the simplest technique. So I actually, you know, because I think part of the problem is that I use water now that I mix. So I mix half tap water and half RO water. So as I'm filling it into the tanks, it's never really that cold because it's always kind of room temp, you know. So with the Aeneas, I wasn't giving them that cold water change, that blast of cold water change that they really needed. So one day it just struck me after I'd had them for almost 2 years and gotten no eggs, and I'm like, why don't I just pull really cold water from the tap and try that? And sure enough, magic. So yeah, so sometimes that keeping that mental list is not the best, but yeah, usually unfortunately that's what I tend to do. I also tend to ask, you know, so I have developed friends all over. Most recently, I'm struggling with CW51, which is like some people call like new panda or whatnot. So it's a nice, it's a larger white hoplosoma, so like a stir-by type, right? And then it has a black saddle on its back, basically. So it's CW51. Some of them have a smaller saddle that just sits right below the dorsal, and then others, I don't know if it's a different location, but that saddle goes almost all the way down the whole side of the fish. So the first time I had them, it had the smaller saddle. This group that I've gotten, it's to me, it's the nicer one where that black saddle goes all the way down the bottom of the fish. It's just creates kind of a different effect. It's like the front part of the fish is white, middle's black, and then the back part's white. So it's kind of nice, you know. But I struggled with them the first time, and I'm struggling with them now. I don't think many people have bred them. But I reached out to a friend of mine, Joachim Schoen, and he's in Sweden. Yep. And he had bred them. And I asked him, you know, what did you do? And he said something that I thought a lot of times experienced fish keepers will say, well, I gave them a dry season. And it's like, okay, but what does that technically mean? It's a short answer, right? But Joaquin gave me a really nice breakdown, and he said, to me, you use softer water, right? And I said, yeah, I mix half of my tap, I mix water half tap and half RO to make it softer. And he said, try to do 8 weeks in a row of water changes with just the straight tap water. So get them in hard water for 8 weeks in a row, and then try giving them 3 weeks in a row of pure RO. So then so create much harder water for 8 weeks and then softer water. So in a sense, that's kind of a dry season, right? But it's just a much more well-defined one, So that's what worked for him. So I'm on week 4 right now, so of the hard water. So we'll see how it goes. But it would be great, to be able to spawn those. So yeah. So yeah.
Cool.
So.
I've got a couple of questions. We were going to leave with one, but we'll go with this one because it makes sense now that we're talking about water. When you say low TDS water, have you found that low carbonate hardness is more, less, or equally as important as low calcium and magnesium?
So I honestly don't measure the carbonate hardness necessarily. Like I do occasionally do GH and KH, but I find that for the most part it's stable, so, and it's usually 2 or 3 degrees. The little tube test kits kind of drive me nuts because they're not all that accurate, so if somebody can provide me with a meter that I can stick in the water and it gives me a really accurate reading of carbonate hardness, I'll use it all the time. But the tube ones are they just drive me a little crazy. So I like the TDS. pH, yeah, I've got a meter. It kind of is irritating because it has to be calibrated a lot, but that's part of the reason why I use TDS a lot, is just that it's simply calculated, right? You put the electrodes in the water, boom, you can check your conductivity or your TDS. It's not, there's no grounds for interpretation. So that's and there's no, well, maybe my meter wasn't calibrated enough, so maybe I'm not reading the pH right, something like that, or my tubes, was that 1 drop or 2 that I just dropped in there? I'm not 100% sure, so I don't go crazy with those, kind of if wishy-washy measures too much. Again, if you could provide me scientific meters that pull that stuff, I'll use them all the time. I'm good with that. I will say one comment on calcium. So one of the first bad experiences I had was with Corydoras metae, and that one I had already bred Corydoras, or Osteogastrorhinea, Corydoras Hoplosoma palliatum, which used to be Corydoras palliatus, and I think another one that was kind of odd. I think it was like Earharti, so which is now Hoplosoma Earharti, but at that time it was Corydoras Earharti. So I bred 3 of them, and I was able to get some real chunky metae, and so the bandit Cory, and they looked really good. And the guy who sold them to me said, I think you'll get these to spawn right away, and he was right. Within a couple weeks, started getting 80 eggs a week. They were spawning like crazy, and I was doing all my normal processes, but the eggs would not hatch, or if they did hatch, and the fry would come out not looking like a tadpole, but looking like a piece of string, and it would die shortly thereafter, right? And I was trying to figure that out, and I talked to Ted Judy. Used to be a YouTuber that had Ted's Fish Room. He was one of the first big fish YouTubers, and he was local to me, and I said, you got any ideas? And he said, well, actually, it was just seeing that with the daisy rice fish, Oryzias woweri, that I was trying to spawn them in our tap water, and I'm finding that they can't break the eggs. So I cut the water with 50% RO, thereby decreasing the amount of calcium in the water by 50%. And then the egg shells were not as hard, and I tried it with those metae, and after a couple of water changes using RO instead of the tap water, definitely that calcification of the eggs had to be the problem, because then they started hatching in the normal time frame in 4 or 5 days, and when they hatched, they were like, they were tadpoles, they weren't string beans, they were healthy, so they made it, so I think that's something, again, and calcium, I would imagine there is probably a better test, but it's for saltwater, so I don't know if that applies to freshwater or not, but I pretty much only do the type of tests regularly that I can get an instant readout, and there's no, was it 1 drop or 2? Because that's how many degrees of KH it was, So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Rebecca's just brought up. She said the same with Ancistrus. Calcium or similar seems to prevent hatching, and there are papers behind that. So.
Yep.
Makes logical sense. I was
Yes,
speaking to someone here in Nelson who bred discus, and he was having a similar problem with eggs hardening far too fast, and he had to fiddle around with stuff, dropping that, and then he got success that way. So that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That's cool. All right, so we'll bring up a question that we had from Rebecca from a very long time ago in this stream. Congratulations on having Corydoradinae McLure named after him, even if it was last year. So how did that come about, and what was the process on that? And can you explain all about that to us, please?
Sure, definitely. So that fish used to have the code CW16. The locals in Peru called it teniente, which I think translates roughly to lieutenant, and I think it's because it's kind of a tan Aeneas type Cory. So now it's an Osteogaster. I don't have Corydoras. It's actually Osteogaster McLure, but they called it the Lieutenant Cory in, when they brought it over here, and it has a little orange marking on the shoulder, and kind of a darker mark in the middle, which is, I would guess it was the orange shoulder thing that they were referring to, calling it the Lieutenant Cory, nice fish. I was able to, I believe that Frank Falcone, who was a U.S. Cory guy, and I think he's passed away now, he was able to breed them, the first in the U.S. to try to breed them, and I was able to get some that he had spawned, and unfortunately Frank had some kind of odd medicating measures. Like one of them was, I'm trying to think what do they use in embalming fluids? What is the chemical? Formalin. Yes. Formalin. Yes. So Frank used a lot of formalin. In addition to that, I think he also used a lot of methylene blue on his eggs and fry. And I don't think either of those is necessarily, I think it's too chemically, right? It's just, if you could do it naturally, you're better off, so, but yeah, those fish that I got from him always had problems. They never did well. So I saw an opportunity that Ian Fuller was down in Peru, and they were collecting some CW16, and he was at that point in time was partnered with Michael Barber here in the United States. And I said to Ian, I'm like, hey, I'd really love to have that fish again. You think you can get me some that Michael would be able to ship to me once it gets back? And Ian said yes, and Michael said no, I think, and then Ian said yes, and and then Michael said, but we're going to charge him through the roof, and Ian said no, he's my friend. And so at any rate, it got to be kind of a back and forth, and I don't think Michael took the best care, because when I received the fish, they were mostly floating. So they were so I think Ian had gotten, I think, 10 or 12 for me, and I think I only had 4 left. So the rest were all floating. Yeah. And I talked to Louise Tencott, who's my friend, and fish, can you preserve them for me? And I said, sure. Okay. So he told me how to preserve them. And I said, I'll get these to you next time we meet at a convention or something, And so I had them preserved. I took pictures of them for him. And I think Hans and Ian got him some too. But his biggest complaint was that he didn't have any large ones, And so I had taken live pictures of of mine for him because he wanted to describe them, and he saw the live pictures that I've taken of the ones that I had left, the 4 I had left, and they were probably all 4 females. And he said, "Oh, those would be perfect." And I'm like, "But they're my live ones." And he's like, "I really need those to describe them." And okay. So I murdered my last 4 CW16 very, very nicely. So he's Louise. I will tell you, Stephen Grant on Facebook calls him Dr. Death, but he cares about the animals. I mean, he really truly does. And he showed me a method which, I put them in a tub, and then we slowly dripped in clove oil, which kind of puts them to sleep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then so once they're kind of asleep, then you can add vodka, and that finishes the job. So so we and I did it his way, and we did it that method, and then I was able to preserve those. And then when I did meet up with him at the All Aquarium Catfish Convention in 2018, I brought him all of his dead fish. Here you go. Even the ones that I had to sacrifice for science. So but I think that was the big part, that he saw that I was dedicated enough to do that, and then he decided at that point that he was gonna name this one after me, even though other people already had some other claims to it. But I think that was the thing that he said, just an aquarist who's willing to sacrifice for science and whatnot, and I think he liked that. So yeah. In addition to that, he and I have had a good friendship. I've proofread the English on a bunch of his papers, which at this point is almost unnecessary because he's gotten really, really good with English. And I've provided him with some photos, not as many as like Hans. Hans is providing him with photos all the time, but I think the description for the skunk cory that he did when it was renamed used to be Arcuatus. Then we figured out that Arcuatus was actually a pointy snout one, so Arcuatus is a Brocus now, and the one that everybody knows as the skunk cory is a Hoplosoma, or a short round snout one, and we realized that it's not Arcuatus. So he wrote a paper because Stephen Grant was the one who kind of figured that out. So he named that one at that time Corydoradinae, and I think the primary picture was one that I had that he provided for that. So that was kind of cool too, to have a picture that I took be a part of a description of a fish. So that was kind of neat. So yeah.
Cool. It's both a very awful story, but a nice story at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's good and bad. Yeah.
So we've had a couple more questions come through. Do you have any advice for breeding Corydoras hepatus?
Hephaestus. So I'm not sure about the last part.
That came underneath it. That comment, it broke up.
Okay. Yeah. So
what size do they mature? I think the question was.
Yeah. Okay, so Hephaestus shocked me. So I actually was hesitant to get them at first because Louise and I talked about them, and he felt that they were kind of not plentiful in nature. So it was kind of one that I was hesitant to get, and then I started seeing a lot of people in the UK, Asia, whatnot, starting to get them, even some people in the United States, and a guy in Chicago, which was kind of near me. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yep. Yeah.
Right, that was my fault.
Oh, no problem. And he imported some, and I said, well, how about you just send me some and I'll take some pictures for you and send them back, and I was like, because I don't want to be a part of this. But eventually, I got a few of them and took pictures for him. The guy was thrilled that the pictures that I had, so that he was going to use it to sell the fish, but I was shocked because about 2 weeks after I got them, they started spawning, and at that point in time, I was like, well, I talked to Louise, kind of said, well, probably better me who can produce more of them than them going somewhere else. Right. But what I learned about them is that they are, despite the fact that they're rare and really nice looking fish and crazy, they're very easy. So, plants in the aquarium and you don't have any other fish to eat the eggs or fry, they lay relatively large eggs. The fry hatch, and they're relatively large when they hatch, and the fry will just survive. If you have a 15, 20 gallon tank, bunch of plants in there, you're gonna find fry. So that's one thing that's really nice about them. As far as the age goes, I would say I've had probably about 8 months. I would say 8 to 9 months old Hephaestus. And as I mentioned, when they hatch, they're pretty big. So they, as long as you're feeding them good and they're growing quickly, they don't have to be very large. They don't get very large compared to other Aeneas types or Osteogaster. I think they get about a max of 2 inches. Yeah, maybe a little 2+. So they don't need to be large size to spawn. They don't need to be super old. I would say 8 to 9 months old. And again, if that's the only fish you're keeping in the tank, or you're keeping it with something with an insanely small mouth, I think I have Asian rummy nose rasboras in there, and their mouth's not big enough to eat the fry, so those are okay. But yeah.
Do you keep other species of fish in your breeders or in with your cories, or are they just species only?
Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. So and that's another good question with, do you keep multiple cories together too? Yeah, because that's another there's part of that too. So so if I'm doing a breeding effort, especially if it's something that I haven't done before, most times I'm going to keep that fish in the tank and that's it. So my CW111 right now, they're the only ones in the tank. But what I learned from that Hephaestus was, I had the Asian rummy nose in there, Sabwa resplendens in there, just because I didn't. I thought I was only going to have a few of them and they weren't going to spawn and whatnot with the Hephaestus. But then it turned out not only did they spawn, but fry started to show up in the tank. So I realized, hey, these two can be tank mates. And so usually if I'm trying to breed, then I have to know that it's going to work, basically. So like I've learned a lot of times that it doesn't work. Like endlers, for example, they're pretty small fish. One would think it's okay, but I've seen endlers take a larger cory egg and swim around with it in their mouth. So it's like, so they even though it doesn't really fit in their mouth, they still will go after the cory eggs. Even stuff as crazy as shrimp, which is nuts because some people use shrimp as an antifungal. I've talked to people who say, oh yeah, I put a cherry shrimp in with my eggs and then that keeps them clean. That's not what I've seen. I've seen if I put a cherry shrimp in with my eggs, the eggs are going to be gone. So you have to be careful with all different kinds of things. You've got to kind of got to see and find out what's going to work and what's not. As far as keeping cories with other cories, now that we have the different genera or different genuses, it makes it easier. You don't want to keep hoplosomas with other hoplosomas. So in other words, like, you don't want to keep what used to be Corydoras panda with Corydoras sturbi, or Corydoras panda with Corydoras trilineatus, because they will cross. They will readily cross. I've seen crosses of them for sale in the stores. Aspidoras, make sure not only you're not keeping them together, I'd even advise don't keep them in tanks next to each other, because they like to go up to the top and hop out. So and aspidoras, the ones that are in the hobby, that's the ones that we know the most about. All of them have the same number of chromosomes because studies have been done on them. So any aspidora that's really in the hobby right now, any aspidoras can breed with another aspidoras. Not only will they cross, but their fry are going to be they're not mules or whatever. They'll have fry that can have have eggs and babies themselves. So yeah, so you got to be really careful. Some huge mistakes have been made with aspidoras. I think as much as we like to say it's the Americans making the mistakes, I've heard of some mistakes getting made in Germany and whatnot. Where people have crossed things when it comes to aspidoras that they thought, oh yeah, this is the same as this, I can keep them together, or this is different than this, I can keep them together. Don't do it. Especially with aspidoras, don't keep them in the same tank, because those I've seen 6 months old, they're fertile, they can breed, they're ready to go. So yeah, you can't even keep the young ones, with other young ones. It's dangerous. So yeah, as far as creating hybrids. So yeah, so
while we're on this topic, Tom might not be in the chat anymore, but he definitely was before. The other day, he asked me to ask this question, and it's very much we were on topic, and I'm just trying to get clarification for him. So it's a little bit long-winded, so I'm going to read it word for word for what he has asked. He said,
no problem.
one thing I've been curious about lately is in regards to lineage 4 and 6 merging with 5 and 9. We used to understand with the old lineage that if species were in the same lineage that there were high chance of hybridization. If they were in separate lineage, they wouldn't cross. Does that mean that these lineages were always able to crossbreed, or is it now that just that some species will and some won't?
So with the lineages, this paper that described the lineages was based upon phylogenetic work that was done prior to 2011, and the paper came out in 2011. So as far as 4 and 5, which is Microcorydoras was 4, and then Gastrodermis is 5. So you're basically talking about your elegans types. So we always had a mental issue with that, because when they talked about Microcorydoras, you can look at Pygmaeus, Hestatus, even maybe Aspidorus pauciradiatus, which actually is not an Aspidorus, it's a Cory. So those three are or it's not a Cory anymore, it's a Gastrodermis. But those three are small enough where you could say, okay, I could see how those would be, even though they look a lot like the elegans types and they behave a lot like the elegans types, I can see how they would be somewhat different. But when they did that genetic study, there was some of the microcorridors that were the same size or larger than the other elegans types. So at that point in time, I think the scientists that were evaluating that said this microcorridors thing just doesn't seem to fit. So these are all basically the same kind of fish. Some are smaller, some are larger, but they're all an elegans type, which is now a gastrodermis. So that's the genus that they used. When it came to the lineage 9 is the Hoplosoma, so that's your Sturbies, pandas, and whatnot. And lineage, I'm not going to make you repeat the question. I'm going to remember it. I think it's 6. So I think 6 is the Paleatus one. It's either 6 or 7. Sorry, I always get goofed up on that. But that's what got combined, was basically the ones that used to be Corydoras paleatus got kind of grouped in with the ones that are like Corydoras sturbi. So those are all Hoplosoma now. Morphologically or body style wise and structure wise, they're very similar. What's not is the color pattern. So all of the lineage 6, 7, which are the Paleatus type lineage, all have this sort of brown, tan, white, and sometimes there's blue metallic, but all this blotchy color pattern and that the other types don't have. They also are geographically in a different spot. So if you picture like Uruguay, southeast Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. That's that corner that's kind of the southeastmost region of where corridors live or can exist, or corridors types. That's where all of those Paleatus types were found, and kind of nowhere else, in addition to that, I think in a lot of those spots, the Hoplosoma types, like, the Sturbi, panda, whatnot, all those, you didn't see a lot of those in those areas. So it kind of makes sense. I do think that, genetically, they probably are slightly different, but it does kind of make sense that they would all be the same genus, it's just from different areas. Can they hybridize? I haven't seen it. Doesn't mean they can't. So most of the hybridization that I have witnessed in the hobby are triggered or chemically induced hybridization of long snout cories in Asia. And they're trying to create some kind of pattern, that they want to, let's create a tiger pattern or whatever, so whatever they're trying to do, but that's on purpose. Then I've seen one guy accidentally crossed two Corydoradinae or lineage one. He did that. He had them in the same tank, shouldn't have done that, and they crossed. But the large majority is Aspidoras and Haplosoma, or the lineage 9. So those ones seem to be the biggest ones that will cross with each other. But as far as crossing with other types, I heard somebody at one point in time say that they thought the panda crossed with a red laser, but there was never any real proof of that. So it's like, that, and those would be really, really weird. But yeah, so
cool. Awesome. I hope that helps, Tom, and I'm sure if you're not in the chat, you will be watching this later today. So we got that in for you, buddy. I'm happy for you.
Yep.
That was a fantastic explanation, by the way. So being that I think that was quite a complex question, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go for a slightly easier question here. Do pandas prefer glass or mops to spawn on?
So they're the ones that prefer the glass that I've seen. And again, remember, this is only in the aquarium, not in nature. They don't go looking for glass in nature to spawn, but because I've heard people say that. Yeah. But the scleromistax and aspidoras definitely, and I think it's because they may spawn on rocks in nature. So they're looking for a harder substrate to put their eggs on. And then I would say panda is more of like they'd probably be more looking for a fine-leafed plant, so they probably would use mops more often. Doesn't mean you won't find eggs on the glass, but like Aeneas, they'll definitely put them on the glass. So it probably all depends on, what their natural instinct is. So, and I think what with aspidoras, it's really kind of crazy because not only will they put it on a hard substance or hard substrate, but they also put them almost always like on the border of the water and the air, and I kind of think that might be, like a built-in defense mechanism, like that it's right where the water's moving a lot, so they can't really be seen, the eggs can't really be seen well from down low or above, so it's kind of interesting that they put them like where there's some flow or water movement, they put them right on the surface. But usually, like I said, a hard substrates, you would think probably in nature that would be rocks, so it's at least my best guess. The other thing that to think about is that, like in the Rio Negro, for example, there's not a lot of plant life, so they may be using roots and stuff like that, just stuff that's, terrestrial plant roots that are hanging down. So that might be, again, you're better off with mops. So that would be like duplicarius. But also leaves. Like, so if you take oak leaves or beech leaves, almond leaves, and have those sunken in the tank, I've seen some of those Rio Negro species, specifically Parallelus. If you put dead leaves in the tank, they're more likely to spawn on that than anything else. But pandas, yeah, Peru, probably more of a jungle-like environment, and I would say fine-leafed plants would be a possibility in that environment. So I would say a mop is probably a better natural substrate for them. So
cool. That's a fantastic explanation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca would like to know: have you ever kept Corydoradinae in Xingu in this?
Yeah.
Yep.
Xingu actually has that one change. Yeah. So I have never seen them available. Yeah. For not even for sale. So every time I've seen what is now Haplosoma zinguensis, it's no longer Corydoradinae zinguensis, but so Haplosoma zinguensis. Every time I've come across them, it's something else. So I have never seen them available in the hobby. I will say that given that's the case, they probably are from further away from the Amazon. So south, in that regard. I would assume that they're probably from deeper into Para or Mato Grosso, which is hard to get to, and that's probably part of the reason why they're not common in the hobby, and part of the reason why, they're I guess not collected as much, so yeah. Yeah, at least in the US here, I've never seen them for sale. When I've seen people say they have them, it's something else. So so I can't accurately answer that question, but I can hypothesize that they are the Jingu forks a ton, so once it gets past where the plecos that we all know and love live, in those bends, and that where it's real fast moving water and whatnot and warmer, it forks all over the place. I think it spreads throughout two or three really large Brazilians. I think folks tend to forget about is that Brazil is bigger than the continental United States. It's massive. So, and if you've got a river system that's got all these branches and forking through at least 3 states, it's covering a lot of ground. So, I've been able to talk to people collecting both on the Amazon side and further down south, closer to the cities in Mato Grosso, about getting fish from kind of the border of the Para, Mato Grosso in the Jingu Basin, and they won't do it. It's too far. That's what they say. I'm not going to go 800 kilometers, and then go into this wilderness and then try to bring fish back. It's just too far. So.
Next question we have is, what's new in your fish room?
What's new? Okay, yeah, I can answer that question as of today. So I got a box today. I figured I was off of work, so it was a good day. So I've got a guy on the East Coast here in the U.S. is bringing a bunch of pseudomutual or blue-eyed rainbows, and I got 3 new types. So pseudomutual, Evansophi, Decky Creek, I think is the location, and then Telenus, pseudomutual Telenus, and what was the other one? I think it's a more common one, Gertrudii, but from Sterk River system, so it's got a special location. So, so those 3 are brand new. I was also supposed to be getting some that might be more interesting to our listeners today. The shipper said he's got to send them next week, but I was supposed to be getting. Fingers crossed. Again, never seen it in real life, but he has a contact in Suriname, and he's supposed to have Corydoradinae sanchezi, which is now Hoplosoma sanchezi. But I think if you look in Ian's books and webpage, he doesn't even have a picture of sanchezi. So if it's the real deal, it'll be pretty exciting if I get that one. So, and then he was going to send me Hyphesobricon Negodagua, so an interesting tetra. So, yep.
Cool.
So that'll be next week.
You were saying pre-stream, I think it was, that you've sort of moved your fish room around a little bit and closed off a few bits and pieces. What sort of volume of aquariums and species are you kind of holding at the moment?
So I reduced it. At one point in time, I had at least 80 aquariums, so and they were mostly, smaller 10-gallon tanks, and then some 5-gallon tanks. So a lot of separate containers, right? And I think I remember, Ian visited and other folks visited, Hans Evers visited. And I think it might have been Hans's comment about Ian's fish room that he mentioned when he was there that made me think I need to have a little bit less and bigger tanks. So Hans told me that when he visited Ian's fish room, who had, I think, mostly like 7 and 11 liter tanks, smaller tanks, which again, I mean, credit to the guy. He's bred 150 plus species of Corydoradinae, and most of his tanks are smaller like that, right? Which is crazy, But Hans said, he says, well, you kind of remind me of when I visited Ian's fish room. He says, I told him, you keep them in prisons. And, and I said, yeah. So I kind of said, yeah, I get it. They're small tanks, but so I, in addition to that, I also had homemade and cheaply made, so homemade wood racking system and cheaply made metal racking systems, which I had seen various states of failure, so, and it's not the tanks I was able to save, no huge catastrophes, but you could see that the cheaply made metal stands were bowing in the middle. So the tanks were starting to, go sideways. And then the wooden one, so I built them all myself. And I think I didn't coat the wood with anything, and I think eventually some of the wood started to warp. So I started to twist and warp. So you could see that I was having some issues with the stands. So that was really the kicker that got me to start. Let's redo everything. So I got, I built some more wooden stands, but I've coated them all with a super waterproof. Like, it's stuff that you would use to waterproof your basement. So, so every 2x4 is like coated with super waterproofing stuff. And then I did also get some heavy duty metal racks. That was one, so I kind of piece by piece tore everything down and rebuilt it on the new racks. And as I did that, I also did larger tanks, so I have, so less tanks, but larger tanks. And I pretty much still have that configuration. It's just that in the past, with work and family situations, I had taken some tanks down, but I'm kind of back up to about full capacity right now. But I have a few of them that I did have end out, and now that they're the wide part is facing me, so there are still a few less tanks, but it's it's about, right now I can hold about somewhere between 45 and 60, and I'm probably close to like 45 tanks right now. So yeah.
Cool. So we've reached a natural crossroad. We can continue talking about Corydoras if you'd like, or we can talk about your time in the Milwaukee Aquarium Society. We can leave this one up to you. Do you want to? Which way do you want to?
Okay.
Do you want to go with this?
Let's see. So I could definitely talk about my time in the Milwaukee Aquarium Society, and just we can kind of branch out if you guys have questions or whatnot. So
we've got oodles of questions. We've got about 6 different sections, and we only made it to section 2, so we've got plenty of questions to go.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool.
So yeah,
how did you become involved with that Aquarium Society?
So as I mentioned, I think it's kind of looking to get my son more interested. He was interested in fish to some extent, but I thought, oh, this would be a good way to get him really interested. And unfortunately, I would bring him to the Aquarium Society meetings, and he started asking, can I bring my game system to the the handheld game system? Because obviously he was bored. Me on the other hand, it was like just mind numbing. I think. We had Phil Bennis was one of the first speakers, and he's passed away now. He was out of Cincinnati, but he was one of the first speakers that we had. And I remember him talking about rainbows, and just that, something that I, growing up and going to fish stores, maybe had even seen or witnessed 5 or 6 different species of rainbows, and then to have him present, oh no, there's this kind and this kind and this location, and there's blue eyes, and they're all over the place, right? And it just kind of blew my mind just to know that was out there, and that this guy was breeding them in his home aquarium, so, and those kind of things just kind of really sparked my interest, especially some of the presentations that were given really hit me and said, I want to do stuff like this, so in addition to that, at that time our membership was a little more breeder heavy, I would say. So we had there was a guy who, as far as I can tell, he's kind of disappeared from the hobby, but this guy was just going crazy. I believe he holds the record for the most species spawned in the Milwaukee Aquarium Society and the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. So these are two clubs that have been around for over 50 years. And for this guy within a decade to like break their records, he was going crazy. He really did a lot. And I think at that point in time, we had him and a few others that were just breeding tons and tons of fish. So that really sparked my interest and allowed me to not only pick up some of the stuff that they bred, but also pick their brains and ask them questions, which was really cool. Now I would say, we've got a couple people who breed fish in the aquarium society, but unfortunately I think a lot of them have a lot of the members are, and I don't have a problem with that. Whatever gets people interested is good with me, but a lot of them are much more interested in the YouTube side of things than the actual keeping and breeding fish. Not that they don't want to keep fish, but it's just more so that I want to have what Corey McElroy has, so which is okay. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, it's kind of like, they don't take those next steps and really want to learn about what the fish that they're keeping, or provide necessarily the best environment for them, or try to breed them or whatnot. So we see a lot of that in the club today. So so it's different than it was. So yeah.
Were you president or vice president of?
I'm not.
So were you?
Oh, I was vice president? Yes. Yeah. So I when I was I at that point in time I had my son, who was I think he was about 11, and my daughter was just born, so she was still a baby and wasn't going many places at that point in time. So it was just something for me and my son to do. And then as I mentioned, within that year, I got really interested and I started taking on positions. So I became the librarian, the CARES preservation person, the webmaster, the vice president. It just started all building. And of course, the people who were doing these roles also were very happy to put them on my lap. And when I got to be the speaker chairperson, which was another role that was given to me, that was the one that really kind of opened my eyes, because I did that for about a year and a few months. And what I found out was, in addition to all my other roles, I was taking every single one of my vacation days at work was to do something for the club. So,
Right.
and I was never taking any vacation days for my kids or my family. And at that point in time, I just kind of said to myself, this has got to stop. I was like, there are people who are better suited for these kind of roles than I am. So I let them know I was going to step away and just become a normal member. At the same time was when I was also starting to give presentations. And that is in itself is a whole nother thing that involves travel, and whatnot. So that kind of pulled me away as well. So at this point, I'm just kind of a member. But yeah, I had held many roles at the club at one point in time. I was never the president, but lots of other roles. So yeah.
Do you think that clubs are on the incline or the decline where you are?
Where I am, I would say on the incline. And I do think that part of that is thanks to some of the YouTube followership, and I think that more people are seeing these videos and getting interested, which again, like I said, whatever helps the hobby is I'm all about. That's great. Other areas I would say I've heard of a decline, now some of that I think it can be due to it grew too much or too big. Ohio is a spot. There's got to be like 11, 12 fish clubs in the state of Ohio.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think it's just too much, and I think that some of them are going to survive and others are going to have problems, just because it's, if you have two clubs that meet once a month and they're only 10 miles or 15 miles apart from each other, people are going to pick one or the other, I think, and I think that that kind of can contribute to a little bit of a decline in some areas. But yeah, with us, I mean, we're way up on our membership and we're way up on our swap meets, and the auction was down, but I kind of like I myself have been frustrated with our auctions because um it's almost too much, so like you bring fish to it and then they have to auctioneer things off for about 5 or 6 hours. By the time you get to the end of that period, most of the people who are buying stuff have either spent all their money or left. So it's kind of like it's hard to make any money at the auctions if you're trying to sell fish, and if you're trying to buy fish, you're either sitting on your butt for 5 or 6 hours, or you're paying the higher prices towards the beginning. So it's kind of a frustrating thing. But the swap meets themselves are the last time, for the first time, they had to limit the people coming in the door and charge admission. So prior to that, they never had to do that. So now we've had so many people coming into our swaps now that the place that we hold our swaps said, you need to stagger people coming in because you're going over capacity of the room. so that part's picked up quite a bit, so that's kind of nice. So yeah.
How do you think that the Aquarium Society has not just sort of helped you with your fish keeping, but improved your fish keeping?
So I think having other people who are interested to ask questions on a monthly basis at these meetings is huge, right? Just so you have other people who are interested in the hobby. They might be interested in something that you're not necessarily, but maybe you want to ask some questions and try to get into that part of the hobby. So that's huge, and having those people to ask questions to is great. I think the other big part, which I think is something that I've seen some clubs go away from now, but I think that needs to continue, is the speakers, because I think that is so it refreshes even older aquarists or people who are stuck in, I have bred killies for 25 years and I'm only interested in killifish. Well, you might hear a speaker give a great presentation about Tanganyikan and cichlids, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to try some Tanganyikan and cichlids. So those kind of things, it's just a constant refresher to keep people interested and to keep people learning more. So I think that the presentations or the talks that are given are this second biggest part. I think that helps not just me but all fish keepers. So
Yeah. That brings up a fantastic segue. Empire of the Dirt Aquatics would like to know what is required to get Rob to give a talk for a fish club.
Well, a flight to New Zealand would be great. I'm kidding. I did say, when I told my wife, I said I'm gonna mess with them, saying, why didn't you just have me there instead of virtually? But no. Usually, I am not there. There are speakers who are a bit demanding. Like there's a speaker fee that they command or whatnot. I am not like that. So basically, if you cover my travel and my stay, a lot of times clubs will give me one meal with the club. If you don't give me a meal with the club, I'm not going to cry. So travel and stay are the big things. So I will say, in the beginning, I was a little more apt to to have people put me up in their own homes or whatnot, but as I've kind of gone to a lot of different clubs now, if I don't know the people really well, I would prefer that they would put me up in a hotel. So like there's certain people that I know really well, I'm fine staying at their house or whatever. But yeah, other people, if I don't know them well, I would prefer that they, while I'm in town, they put me up in a hotel. And then other than that, just cover the cost of the travel. I don't have any other real special requirements. So,
Cool. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, there is a wee start there. Jeff is not from New Zealand, so maybe something might happen there. He's in, from what I've just noticed in the chat, Wisconsin. So
Oh, well,
yeah.
that wouldn't be hard, yeah. But I don't know. I'm probably kind of like um, a top 40 song that's been played too many times in this state. So so I don't know if they want to hear me again. So too many presentations in Milwaukee. So I'm always their backup if one of our speakers doesn't show up. They're like, hey, can you do it? Yep. Again? Okay. Yeah. So
It doesn't matter how often you talk to someone. There's always something new that can be learned. A
that's
little
true.
different piece. That's one.
True.
All of a sudden, hey, I never heard that first time
Right.
around. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I change up the presentation just about every time, try to keep it a little fresh. But it's the Milwaukee Aquarium Societies. Yeah, I think at one point in time they had I did 3 different talks, but they had me give talks 3 months in a row, and I'm like, y'all gotta be sick of me by now. It's too much. So,
Can you share a challenging breeding project that you have worked on, whether it be corridor or anything else?
um, let's see. So I can share a couple, and one I think would be a success, and the other would be a failure. So
Oh,
so one of them that I would consider a failure so far. I still have time to make up for it, but is what used to be Corydoradinae equus. Now it's Osteogaster equus. So I got 8 healthy adult individuals. I believe they were wild caught, and they were let me see, like I know I had both sexes, but they were uh, like right on the verge, I guess you would say. Like I would see them going up and down the glass, and the males were interacting with the females, and I said, I think I have it right where it needs to be, but it just couldn't quite get it there. And I talked to a few people and tried some things that they suggested. One person suggested pointing a power head directly at the front glass, and I tried that, and it almost seemed to like they almost trigger them, but nothing. And another person said, well, you need to try a different live food. So not, if they've been eating blackworms and baby brine shrimp, why don't you try a different live food like mosquito larvae and daphnia. And so I put out a tub, and I collected a bunch of mosquito larvae, and I made sure that they didn't hatch and become mosquitoes to attack my neighbors. But um, but what was crazy was I added the mosquito larvae that came from outside into the tank, and they all died the next day. So after, and I would assume that's what it had to be, was the mosquito larvae. So whether those, I know in the cities sometimes they treat parks and whatnot with pesticides. So maybe the mosquitoes that had bred in my tubs had some sort of pesticide on them, or maybe something got into the tub that I didn't know about. I don't know. But yeah, but I would think. I mean, that's just the water. These were I didn't use the water. I just used the actual organisms or whatever. So yes, but so I would think it might be pesticides of some type. But yeah, that unfortunately the one suggestion, and no fault to that person, but yeah, me trying that suggestion actually unfortunately took out my whole group. So so that was a failure one. And again, definitely the equus are out there. I could probably try those again at some point in time and hopefully be successful. But and I think the biggest success was Scleromistax macropterus, and that's kind of a fun story too. So so Scleromistax macropterus is it is the the only Scleromistax in the hobby, I will say, that kind of more so resembles those Corydoradinae paleatus types, where it's brown and blotchy. So I had ordered some early on in my Cory days. I would think like 2014, and I got some from a vendor on the East Coast. I'm not going to say their name, but this person at that point in time kind of frustrated me, and he shipped those, and I also got Scleromistax CW38. The Macropterus that he shipped me in 2014 came with no fins. So they were like basically worms, and I was like, I got a few of them to survive, but they were, so obviously he had not kept them or treated them very well, and they were in bad shape. The other ones that I got from him were okay. So I unfortunately kept in contact with him and kept buying from him. Later on down the road, he really to the tune of almost $1,000 took me to the cleaners, and I got almost nothing for $1,000. So I for a long time, if I was in person, I would definitely tell them this person's name and his organization, but I won't do it publicly. but on the East Coast of the United States, there's a pretty bad vendor out there. So but that first experience with Macropterus was kind of a bummer, and I kind of said, well, if I ever see him again, I might try it. I did see them when I went to UK the first time in 2017, but it was only males. It was at Pure Aquatics, and they only had males, so I figured that wasn't worth bringing some back in the hopes that I might find females. But I did mention it to a local guy who kept an eye out for me, and he buys and sells fish out of his basement. And he said, I can get you Macropterus. And I said, okay. And he brought in only 8, only for me, I think. And I bought them from him. They weren't terribly expensive, but that was like 20. That was 2018, and then I kept them in a 20-gallon tank. And just miraculously, one day I came home from school, and there was 100 some eggs on the glass, and I'm like, what the heck? This is a fish that nobody really has bred. So I documented everything, collected the eggs, was able to get a bunch to hatch, and I think I raised out about 23 or 24 of them. They have the same problem as Barbatus, where they kind of, the fry put off something that really hurts the other fry, so they're difficult in that regard, which is weird because other Scleromistax like Prionotus, CW38, CW147, they don't do that. You can raise as many of those together with each other as you want. I've raised as many with the CW38. I've raised as many as like 80 in a tank together, and they are fine. But Macropterus and Barbatus, for whatever reason, the fry are poisonous to each other. So so I did as best I could, and then they never spawned again. And I sat there, and we got into the COVID years, and of course everything became more virtual. And I had talked to a guy, so he's a fish hobbyist in Brazil, and he was studying to be an ichthyologist, but he decided to open up his own skateboard shop in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I was, as a youth, I was a skateboarder and a punk rocker, I guess you would say, and so he was the same, and I think we're about the same age too. So I brought it up to him. I'm like, this is really kind of interesting, like, you did the whole skateboarding thing your whole life. I used to, but yeah, we have similar music tastes. So we're both into Corys, and so we started talking, and eventually, with my broken Portuguese and his probably better English, we did a FaceTime, and we were showing each other our fish rooms, just over our phones. And
Cool.
he got to see my Macropterus tank, and he's, Rob, this is not actually in Brazilian Portuguese. It sounds more like hob, because that's how they pronounce their R's. But he's hub. This is not right, And I said, well, what? And he says, well, Macropterus. He goes, this is right by my house. I can collect these in a stream near my house. They don't live. Yeah, he said, they don't live in clear water. They live in Coca-Cola. And I'm like, well, do you mean like dark, darker? And he's, yes, it's dark water. It's very dark, black water. And I'm like, okay. And he says, so you should keep them in black water. Okay. I was like, I'm gonna, I see what you're saying, and you have experience with them in nature. I'm gonna give it a try. So I took a big 1-gallon pot and took almond leaves and oak leaves and smaller chunks of driftwood and alder cones, and boiled it all for like 45 minutes, and it made the the gallon pot water was super dark, like you couldn't see through it, and I drained that all off, and I had them in a bigger tank. It was a 40 gallon breeder tank. And I did a 50% water change. So I removed 20 gallons of water, and then I put 19 back. And the last was this now cooled, completely dark pot of 1 gallon of water. So it immediately turned that tank into black water. The next day, they plastered eggs all over the tank. It was yeah,
Wow.
and it was like yeah, and it was like just that was what they needed. It was just completely. So what was crazy then was this fish that nobody had bred, and everybody considered to be super difficult, then became a weekly breeder. So for the next 4 or 5 weeks, they would breed every time I did a water change. So I do a little 25% water change, boom, plaster the tank with eggs. Do it again, boom, plaster tank with eggs. So it was crazy, and then what ended up stopping them was I kept doing regular water changes, and eventually the water got to be somewhat clear again, and then they stopped breeding. And I said that is nuts. So let's experiment with this. So I kept doing my water changes, and I went 3 months with just clear water, right? And by that time their tank was back to clear. And then I said, okay, let's do it again. So I did another 50% water change, 19 gallons of clear, one of my gallon pot of super dark water, and same thing all over again. So they started spawning, and then again 4 weeks in a row of spawning every week. So I did try it one more time, which was, I think it was a longer period of time. I think I waited like 18 months, like where I let it get clear, and then I waited 18 months and I did it again. So it's completely repeatable. And that was pretty exciting because it's like super hard fish to spawn. Nobody really had a documented spawning of it. And then I feel like I not only figured it out, but I cracked it so that other people can too. So,
That's fantastic. That's
so,
very cool.
Yeah.
Is there any literature that you like to, consume to help you along your way? Is there particular websites, particular books? Obviously, talk to people to get some information and bounce ideas, but where else do you find your stuff for this sort of thing?
So I think the best forums or asking people questions are usually Facebook and Planet Catfish website. So they usually have the most knowledgeable people and can answer questions pretty quickly. So that's both of those places. I would say on Facebook, Corydoradinae World, Corydoradinae Spawning Reports is another one that I habituate, and those tend to get a little bit more advanced questions, whereas some of the other ones like Planet Corydoradinae and I have Corydoradinae Land now. Corydoradinae Land used to be, but I believe the gentleman who ran that passed away. Now it seems to be more beginner. Was that Ian? Do you know, John? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Ian Fuller, yeah.
Yeah, not Ian Fuller. As a guy from Scotland, he ran Corydoradinae Land. I can't remember his last name. So
No,
yeah.
I don't know.
No, okay, maybe okay, yeah. So yeah, so that one seems a little bit more like they're getting more beginner stuff now. But Corydoradinae Land used to be one that I would ask questions on too. So I think what else is more general catfish questions? The Catfish Study Group has a page, and Stephen Grant has. I'm wearing the shirt "Catfishes of the World," so that's catfish questions. That's good as far as Facebook goes. And then as far as books, so I got into Amazonas magazine when Hans was running it, and I really thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And he's kind of not doing that anymore. He's passed that on, and I feel like Amazonas magazine is still good, but I think it's dropped a little bit in since Hans has moved away from that. I don't think not necessarily it's not any worse, but I just think that it was more groundbreaking and exciting when he was doing it. So it's a little slower pace now. And then Ian, of course, Ian and Hans write all these books that are, identifying Corydoradinae catfish, breeding Corydoradinae catfish. Those are great reference books, for anybody who wants to learn about that. As far as other Cory books, mostly like, I think the other ones that I've seen that are decent mostly focus on like just having good pictures, which is fine too. If you want to look at that, see different types of Corys and have good pictures, that's fine. I haven't found any other book or book series that I would say knowledge wise is huge or groundbreaking. It's all pretty much the same stuff you can find online. I'm trying to think of anything else that I'm missing. So I am a member of the I'm going to screw this up. It's the International ISBGW, I want to say. So it is German, and it's the International Group of Samlers, which I think is tetra in German, Schmerlin, which is loaches, Wels, which is catfish, and then the other one starts with a G, and I'm forgetting it. But it's a bunch of smaller egg-laying fish that this German group is. They release a bi-monthly magazine, and that is, if you can look into that, it's almost always something that nobody else has spawned. So they release, and they release it in English and German now, and it's
Cool.
let me think. I think it's like IGBBSW, I want to say, or something like that. So I would have to look it up. Yep. There we go. Yep. BSSW. Perfect. Okay. Yep. So they have some really neat and very informative stuff, and it's a lot of times it's something people haven't done. So that's cool.
Cool. When you introduce new fish into your fish room, is there a particular procedure you go through to making sure everything is in good condition? Do you have your own checks and balances for yourself?
Yeah. So typically I don't do quarantine tanks per se. So I will not set up a specific tank that I'm going to say the fish are only going to be in here temporarily. I try to get them into the tank that they're going to go in, for better or worse, from the beginning. Now, if it's a tank raised fish, especially from a trusted breeder, I'm much more likely to acclimate those and put those in with existing fish. If it's wild fish, I will try to put them in, either an emptied tank that used to have something else in it or a brand new tank, just because there's a much greater chance with wild fish that they have something, and you don't want to transfer that to your existing fish, so so for example, the rainbows that I got today, I got from a trusted breeder. They're all small juveniles. He kept the juveniles separately from any other fish while he was raising them. So now I put those in with existing fish, and I really don't have a lot of fear that something bad's going to happen with those. They should be in good shape. And I acclimated them. So in this case, he sent me breather bags instead of normal bags. Normally, if it's just a normal bag, I'll float it for 10 to 15 minutes, and then I won't use any of the existing water, but I'll put them into a net and release them. If they send me breather bags, then I'll use a specimen container. So I empty the breather bags into the specimen container, float that specimen container in the tank, and I'll siphon off with a turkey baster. First I'll do like a little part of the water, get that out of there, and then put water from the tank in, and I'll just keep going every 10 minutes. Then I'll do a little more, so that by the time they're going to the tank, they're used to that water, so. But yeah, and then as far as like new wild fish, other than those long snouted Corys, I don't. I will watch them and see if I can see any signs of illness or anything like that. Then I'll try to medicate them. But yeah, I don't do that other than long snouts. I think every long snout that I've ever bought or gotten wild or whatever, I'll run the discus wormer or the flubendazole on it, just because of the fact that, you know, the study that they did, I think they pulled 110 amapensis, and they said 93% of them had internal worm parasites. So it's like, so I would imagine that if you're getting long-snouted Corydoras, unless they're coming from somewhere where those worms haven't figured it out yet, those parasitic worms that live in the benthic zone, they know that you know, long-snouted Corys are gonna hoover them up and they know, yeah, be their meal ticket. So yeah. So
Cool.
so
So when you're setting up new aquariums, do you always use the same kind of substrate, or do you switch it around a bit depending on what you're putting in there?
yeah, so I use for the Corys, I use like a silica sand, and it's so they actually, I think they mine that here in Wisconsin, so I can get 50-pound bags of it. It's uniform silica sand, and it's relatively cheap. I have learned, however, you have to be careful where you get it, because I know one place that I've gotten it, I believe they may have accidentally, you know, gotten concrete in with, because I found that I put the sand in, and then, you know, thought I was all good to go, but before I put the fish in, I stuck my hand in there, and some of the sand was like, had formed a sheet, you know, and I was like, what the heck is that? And I'm like, okay, empty this, yeah, out it goes, right? I can't do that, you know. So I've kind of settled on a specific brand that I trust, and so I use a lot of that silica sand, and then I use for plecos and tetras and rainbows, sometimes I'll use a bare substrate, you know, because they don't need to have sand necessarily.
So with the Corydoras substrate, do you ever mix in like any botanicals into the substrate to create like a natural kind of riverbed effect?
Yeah, definitely. So I will use, and again, I've kind of learned my lesson. I live in a city, and insecticides are used. You know, so a lot of times is in the fall, especially, I'll try to plan a family trip to go to, you know, like a state forest or something like that, where there's far less likely to have that kind of thing. You know, especially the larger ones. And the smaller ones, you got to be careful, because if they're close to farmland, still could have some insecticides or whatnot. But the larger ones, where you're kind of going deep in the forest, you can find, you know, leaves are falling all over the place that are good for your fish. So I usually get red oak leaves, white oak leaves, and beech leaves, and those are the ones that I primarily use, because the almonds, I will use them, but I almost use the almonds as more of a medicative, you know, like a weak, you know, so if I see any signs of fin rot or something that it seems like it could be easily taken care of, I'll add an almond leaf. You do have to be careful with almond leaves and doing too many, because just like walnut leaves, they contain a chemical called jugalone, and jugalone is toxic at higher doses to both fish and plants. So you have to be careful not to do too many almond leaves. You know, so I would say in a 10-gallon tank, I would do no more than 2, you know, at a time. So yeah. So, but
I've heard
Indian almond leaves.
Oops, sorry.
Are you talking about Indian almond leaves, or like catappa, or just another? Yeah,
catappa. Yep. Yeah. You can overdo it with those, so you got to be careful. So.
Yeah, I've heard as well when people are breeding and they put almond leaves in with the spawns to help combat the bacteria on the eggs. Is that something you do?
Yeah, I have. So the alder cones I found to be a little quicker at creating the tannins in the water. You know, if you get good alder cones, you can get that water from clear to dark tea in less than 24 hours, you know, if you're keeping the eggs separately. If you're using an almond leaf, it takes a little longer, you know. So I've primarily with Cory eggs, I use alder cones, you know, but I have in the past used almond leaf, and it does help. The biggest thing that I found that was the most amazing with the catappa, or the Indian almond leaf, was I bred bettas. So a friend of mine opened up a shop here a while back, and he was importing bettas from Thailand. Bettas, and he got a pair of these super cool metallic orange, just half moon placottes, they were called, and he said, I got these for you, set them up. He told me how to do it. And within 5 days I had baby bettas, but what I noticed was that, and this was a beautiful mated pair, and the male tore the female to shreds. He just ripped up her fins like crazy. So I took her and I put her in literally like maybe, like about that big plastic container, and I put half of an Indian almond leaf in there with her. Within 2 or 3 days, the fins healed like miraculously. It was like, so it was really, really beneficial, So,
Mhm.
so I definitely use those in a medicative sense, But when I'm using it for decoration or to make the fish meal feel more at home, I usually use oak leaves or beech leaves. So.
Cool. We've had a couple of questions come up from the chat. We'll bring this one up first. Do you have an opinion on whether barbel erosion is caused by bacteria, rough substrate, or something else?
I would say all of the above. um, so, um, so it can occur in addition to rough substrate. Again, that can occur on bare bottom tanks. So if there's enough, bacteria buildup and nastiness, then you can see barbel erosion occur. That because of that, because the cories are sitting on the bottom all the time, and if they're sitting there, they can have the bacteria kind of affect them, especially if and I think what the rough part of it is that, and that's why that's an issue, is especially if they get wounds, if they have scratches or wounds on their barbels. I think that opens the door for the bacteria to really kick in, like to really have a negative effect. Some of the worst barbel erosion that I've seen are in tanks where people are keeping cories with lava rock, either on the bottom or as a substrate or chunks of lava rock, because they look at that lava rock like this is a porous surface. It's probably full of microorganisms. I'm going to go on top of that back and forth all the time, and they just grade their they can mechanically even grade their barbels down to nubs. In addition to that, if they're poking around on it, they're just far more likely to scratch. And if they scratch it and it gets infected, then same thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Cool. And Rebecca has a question. What is your opinion on protein blisters? Do you have any experience on the cause?
Yep. Yeah. So I think from what I've seen, the most is, and this is not my own experience, but what I've seen a ton of is that folks who have discus always ask what cory, what cory can I keep with discus, right? So a lot of times, experienced keepers know that Hoplosoma sturbi, formerly Corydoradinae sturbi, will survive and even breed in the high 80s. What a lot of fish keepers don't know, that I found out on accident, is that Hoplosoma sturbi will also survive when the weather in Wisconsin gets to -15 Fahrenheit for over a week and your heater fails, and you find out that you didn't know that, and your your heater fails, and you check the temperature in your stir-by tank and it's at 55 Fahrenheit. They will also survive that. So stir-by are amazing critters, right? They'll survive very low temps, and they'll survive and breed at very high temps. So we often recommend, if you have to keep stir-by with, where you have to keep a cory with your discus, stir-by is a good choice because it'll tolerate that. But part of the problem is that I think that the discus feeders feed very high protein foods, including beef heart, and of course cories are, they're subject to getting whatever the discus leave behind, which might be schnibbles, and they're eating whatever they can get. And a lot of times you'll see that with those stir-by that are kept with discus, because they're getting that high protein food, they will develop protein blisters. The other thing would be, is I found a certain brands of food, if you look and read the ingredients, like if it contains 60% plus of protein, and you feed that on a daily basis, right? So you're always feeding something that's 60% protein or higher, 60%, then you can see those protein blisters. And that's where I came across it. And I believe I had it on Corydoradinae Panda, that I was feeding them because they seemed to love it. And I had some store-bought brand. I don't think they make it anymore, but it was a 60% protein. I was feeding it to them every day, and they developed bubbles on their backs, basically bubbles next to their dorsal fins, and I discontinued that food. And something else, no, I'm not going to give you that for weeks. And the stuff that I was using was maybe 45% protein, at most 50, and those blisters went away, so just naturally. So
Cool, thank you. We've got a couple more. We were talking about breeding tetras earlier. I think that might have been before we got on the stream.
Yeah, we were. Yep, before we got on the stream.
Yeah. What's your go-to tetra spawning leaves tannins, which is followed up with, or should I skip the leaves and use peat instead?
So I have not yet spawned a tetra where I would say I need tannins. Because I'm using water in my tanks that's pretty low TDS. I'm using about 125 TDS because it's mixed half RO and half tap water. So the tetras that I've spawned are perfectly happy with that. So I would say, and that's a great question though, because I was thinking about something like cardinal tetras, and honestly, what I was thinking when I attempt cardinal tetras, I think I'm going to try to do a mixture like I did with the Macropterus. So I think I'm going to make my own natural batch of tannin infused water, basically. And then I don't know if I'll go as heavy with it as I did with the Macropterus, but when I try to breed cardinals, I think I will put them in a breeding tank that has, maybe, let's say it's a 15-gallon breeding tank that has maybe 14 and a half gallons of my normal water, and then a half gallon of that tannin mixture to give them a real blackwater feel. So that's how I would do it, I think. So yeah.
Fantastic. What advice would you give someone who is just starting out in their journey with Corydoras?
So I've got a couple pieces of advice that I give out. That for one thing is as much as your heart might desire it, don't shoot for the moon. Don't go for the ones that are super expensive. And just from personal experience and watching others try this and fail, don't ever assume that you're going to make this a money-making venture. So it's most aquarists and breeders find that they pump far more money in than they ever get out. So those are two big tips. So don't, basically the long and the short of it is don't overspend. So find something that your wallet or your budget is comfortable with affording a group of 6 to 10 fish, and if you can combine that with finding ones that are kind of stereotypically easy to breed, then you're doing yourself a favor. I think, if there's no harm or no shame in starting with something, even if that's not the one you want to keep long term, but starting with something like Corydoradinae or Corydoras paleatus. Even I as much as Ian is dead set against that, I actually, the first Aeneas that I spawned were long fin Aeneas. It was what was available to me, right? So I was able to get some long fin Aeneas cheap. And I agree with Ian. It's not a natural thing for them. It does affect the way that they swim, and we shouldn't be encouraging or trying to have people create these weird variants of fish, So it's not natural. But again, if you're not planning on keeping it long term, you just want to get the experience, do something like that. Pandas are a little bit more expensive, but if you keep pandas as the only fish in the tank and you keep them in a planted tank, it can be one of those experiences where you don't have to do anything crazy with them to collect eggs or anything like that. You'll just find fry. So pandas are a good one like that. Pygmaeus, another one. If you just keep them in a tank by themselves with plants, you're going to just find fry. So if you want, a no-brainer, super easy one, try Pygmaeus or panda. If you want to start getting your fingers wet, so to speak, and learning how to do it, then try Corydoradinae or Paleotis. Those are great ones to start with, and you have a very good chance of getting eggs. And then at that point in time, if you don't remove the eggs, they may not eat the eggs, but they probably will eat the fry. So it'll force you to do something to try to save them, and force you to do some research and learn, figure out your own method. My personal one is I collect the eggs. I do it with my fingers. I put them in a specimen container with water from the tank. I add an air stone at moderate aeration. Put an alder cone or two in there to give it some natural antifungal. I pull those alder cones out after 24 hours and do small water changes on my specimen container, so that by the time the fish hatch, the water is the same consistency as the breeding tank. And then once they hatch, I leave them alone for 3 days of feeding them a really small amount of microworms. And then, when I feed them the microworms in the small container, I'm doing pretty hard water changes with the breeding tank water every day to clean out any uneaten microworms or fish waste, and then at that point, I usually try to give them a little bit of baby brine shrimp. And if they're eating baby brine shrimp, it's pretty obvious. Their bellies get orange, And at that point, I try to set up a small tank with sand in them and a small filter, and go to they should be good. You can feed them with microworms and baby brine shrimp, alternating at that point until they're practically adults. So
Cool.
yeah.
Cool. Would you recommend catapa in a bottle or stick to the good old fashioned wooden leaves?
I've never tried it in a bottle, and I think I would stick with the leaves. Like honestly, I am a little bit hesitant on any natural mixture like that, because it's really, really difficult to know what you're getting. I see this all the time with alder cones, right? Like people say, well, I tried the alder cones and it didn't work, and I'm like, well, did the water change colors when you put them in there? No. And it's like, well, there could be many reasons why, but the alder tree, which is a weird one, it's a deciduous tree that has cones, like pine cones, but if you don't collect the alder cones at the right time of year, then you could be collecting something that's almost useless. It's not going to kick off any tannins, So if you collect them in where I live here, if you collect them, if I were to go right now to try to collect alder cones and find an alder tree, the ones that are the newest are green, and it's like a little mini green pine cone. If I put that in my water, it's not going to do a thing. The ones that are oldest are brown, and those have seen an entire season's worth of rain and snow and water. So if I go collect those right now and put them in my tank or in a container, they're not going to kick off any tannins either. So right now would be a terrible time of year to go try to collect them. Now, if I wait 2 to 3 months, the ones that were green are going to turn brown, and they're going to be kind of sticky. And those are ideal. That's like if I want to collect ideal alder cones that are going to kick off the most tannin, I would collect them right, like in November, December in my area, and make sure that I get the ones that look, kind of new, fresh, and sticky. They were green, now they're brown, and those are perfect. And they will kick off the most tannins. But even as you keep them, even if you collect them all that, and you keep them in a plastic container, sealed, whatever, over time, they kind of lose that ability a little bit. They dry out a little bit, so it's like the idea of taking something natural and saying it's going to have this amount of, whatever tannins or whatever, that to put it in a bottle is a little, it's a little, it's iffy, right? So I would rather just use the natural stuff when I can. So, yeah.
Okay, well, one more question, and I think we'll begin wrapping up because we've been approaching 2.5 hours now, which is quite a decent time.
Yep.
So another question is, what is the best way to breed the pygmy cories if they have a decent group of them?
So pygmy cories are really interesting in that they don't spend as much time on the bottom of the substrate as other types, right? And for the most part, your microcorridors, as we talked about, or gastrodermis, all those types, the elegans types, their snout is kind of like it's shaped like this, so it's more designed for picking pieces of food off of plants or roots or whatnot than digging in the substrate. So the pygmy cories aren't big substrate diggers, and as a result of that, I think having at least part of the bottom of the tank as either small rounded pea gravel, or even like larger rounded like clay gravel that people use for plant substrate, I think that is a great way to make sure that you get some pygmy cories that they're able to hide in the crevices there and survive, because as much as people say, oh, pygmy cories never eat their fry, I can tell you firsthand, I watched a big old female. She dropped a whole bunch of eggs and then the fry hatched, and I watched her pick off the fry one at a time. So if they're big enough and it fits in their mouth, they do eat their fry. I would say a better thing to say is that pygmy cories don't eat all their fry. That would be a better way to put it. But I kept 12 of them with a sand substrate in a tank with a bunch of floating Java moss and a sponge filter. I did not heat the tank, and I did regular 50% water changes weekly. And over the course of probably about 4 or 5 months, out of the ones that they didn't eat, I probably harvested about 50 fry. So that you don't need the little bit larger rounded substrate, but having a patch of that, you're probably giving the babies a little bit better chance and somewhere to hide until they can grow. The big key is to feed them baby brine shrimp and live microworms. So if you're trying to breed pygmy cories and you're trying to feed them dry foods, it's probably not going to work very well. So they're micro predators and they need really small foods, so baby brine shrimp and live microworms, it's going to be great for the adults. It's going to be great for the babies. If you can do that and feed them once a day with live microworms, feed them once a day with baby brine shrimp, you're going to, even in a 5-gallon tank, you're going to find fry and they're going to survive, and you'll get something out of it at least. So, yep.
Cool. Fantastic. All right. We will leave that there as it's been quite some time, which we appreciate.
Yep.
We like to end all of our streams with what we call the School of Six, which is 6 short answer questions. They're not meant to stump you or put you on the spot, but every now and then they do.
Okay, sounds fun.
So my first question for you is, in a coin toss, do you call heads or tails?
Tails.
Cool. Tails never fails. Are you a tea or a coffee drinker?
A coffee.
Yeah. Cool. Do you think we're alone in the universe?
No.
Fair enough. Mm-hmm. If you could have a meal with anybody alive or dead from any point in the time of the history of the world, fictional or real, who would that be?
She's not even in the room, and I would say my wife. So.
Paper, scissors, rocks. What's your first call?
I'd say scissors, even though I know it doesn't win all the time, but yeah, scissors.
What is your unicorn fish to either keep, spawn, see in the wild, take photos of, anything like that? What is the one fish that you want to have with you at some point?
That's tough because I've actually been blessed to have a lot of them. The CW111s and Hephaestus macropterus. So, oh boy, that's a tough one. I can't say right now that I have anything. I've been very blessed. So yeah, nothing comes to mind that I definitely know some that I will be getting. Like high pressure break on Mermex would be one that I'd like to get. I think that's a really cool one, but it's not necessarily a unicorn. But at some point in time, I hope to have that one. So there you go.
Cool, thank you. And my last question, which makes 7. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or find some of the work you've done or even just get in contact with you and talk queries?
Yeah, probably the best place is Facebook. So I've had a lot of people, friend me on Facebook or even just send me a message. I'm not perfect, and I do, sometimes like the last week, I work in IT, so we were fighting this CrowdStrike issue, and working way too many hours, but I try to get back to people as soon as I can, and try to get back to everybody who sends me a message on Facebook. So that's probably the best way to do it. So yeah.
Cool, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for being with us today. It's much appreciated by the look of all of these comments that have come through. I believe that everybody that has been watching has thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you very much for being with us. It's been a pleasure to have you. So yeah, we really appreciate it.
You've been a great guest.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. So nice talking to you and getting to meet you both. So thanks a lot. So
thank you everybody who has been in the chat. Again, it's much appreciated. Without you guys being there, chatting away and being involved, there's not much point in us doing this. So I really appreciate that as well. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a lovely Friday or Thursday night. It's definitely not Saturday anywhere, but yeah, have a lovely time, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
And catch you later. Thank you very much.